We are in Hebrews chapter 13. We have finally finished the book. Only 13 lessons, but it took us 7 months. So we've just trotted right through here. Now, every time we reach the end of a book, the question comes up. You know what question that is? What's next, right? What's next? Okay. Hey, I graduated from school with a lot of guys who work for different organizations. B.J. Clark, he's now the head of Memphis School of Preaching, and he is one of the main speakers at GBN. Eric Lyons and Kyle Butt, they work for Apologetics Press down in Montgomery, Alabama. And one thing we joke back and forth about, especially I say this with Eric a lot, he has a great lesson on proof that God exists, and I mean, it's an awesome lesson. But I always tell him, man, if I put a lesson together that good, people would say, good job for about 15 minutes Sunday, and then say, okay, what's next? And I said, you got it made, because you get to deliver the same sermon every stinking Sunday, just somewhere else. But that's always the hard part, is coming up with something different. So next week, Lord willing, we're going to work on a new book. Now, I like to, I don't know why I'm holding this, I like to, on Sunday morning, go through the New Testament. So here's what we've covered since I've been here. I am right at 3 years of being here. All right, so we have covered James, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, Romans, Hebrews, James. Let me look at my Bible. Mark, Acts, Jude. I would like to do either 1 Corinthians. Okay. Through bulletins, preachers do this especially in the auditorium. If there's something we covered a lot, we're working on. So I'm trying not to cover what happened last week. Besides, it was really cold. 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians is Corinthians. Modern problems. It's not a website. It's not a blog. Period. WordPress. Okay. My middle name. Period. Com. Now, if you go, it's like that deep now. I keep on there. If you go to that website, I think all the Bible classes I've taught since, it's one of those things, if you're interested in it. Now back to first Hebrew of announcements. You ever notice churches do this, right? Today was radio. Everybody who's sick, here's the upcoming announcement. You'll get to Romans 16. This person and this person greet this person in practical Christianity. All right, let's start in verse to entertain strangers, for by doing entertained angels. Remember the prisoners as if chained with them, those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are in the body also. Okay, first 6 verses are on social relations. What's brotherly love? Yeah, philo, right? Philadelphia, okay? Now, you go to Philadelphia, you don't feel a lot of love all the time necessarily, do you? It's one of those northern cities. I've only been there once. I went through Geno's, flipped me off at some time. And I thought, well, it's the city of brotherly love. Up there, if you smile at somebody, they don't appreciate it. So, love make us do. Why did he say let brotherly love continue? Why is love needed in the church? Okay, it's the bond of Christ. Yeah, okay. It's the bond of Christ. Brother, you don't love God. What else? Tonight's sermon, I started to introduce it this morning. What to do if that's what it's about. We're going to talk about Lot and how he did everything wrong all the time. And still, okay? A preacher one time said, I love church work, but I don't like the people, okay? Is there much church work without people? No, right? Okay? And so you've got to have that idea of brotherly love, that idea of forgiveness. You get that, and you expect everybody to be perfect. They're not going to be perfect because no one is perfect. On Hebrews, it says we cannot, a little bit, if you don't need brethren, it won't be long till you don't need Christ. Be Christians individually. They say, okay, I'll have a relationship with God, but I don't want to be spiritual, but I don't want to be religious, is the way people put it nowadays. Okay? No. No. Everyone's watching. Okay? Well, where are you going to spend eternity? With the hypocrites if you're not right with God, right? Okay. Moral and expensive. What's he talking about when he talks about entertaining angels? Are there angels among us? He's going back to whom? Two characters. Yeah. Before Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot, right? And those three men appeared. Remember that? Those three men appeared when I have been there. But remember, it's reading that, okay? They sit with me, and I'm going to prepare you a goat. And he prepared them a goat, and they spoke. So he didn't even realize they were angels. He just saw that they were strangers. When he saw they were strangers, he wanted to make them feel like family. They went to go to Sodom to talk to Lot. Lot said, you cannot. Lot loved strangers enough, he is willing to give up his daughter. Messed up morality going on in Lot's mind. And it also shows the deeper you get into sin, the more messed up your decisions are to try to make things right. And that's what happened to Lot. He put himself in a situation where there was due. So he offered to sacrifice his angels, and by doing so, saved themselves. Now, you and I today have an obligation to entertain strangers. Now, what does culture, Marshall County, it's a biblical command. How do we do that? Okay, visit those in prison. Okay. One thing about prison in the first century, a little bit different in the first century, you had a lot of Christians who were thrown in prison. So these weren't just the murderers and the embezzlers and things such as that. Okay? But how do you entertain strangers? Okay? One of the beauties about Marshall County is that everybody has always lived here. You know what I mean? We've got generations of folks. Kendall Stevenson, I was talking to him, I guess this was a month ago. And we were talking about families here which go back 4 generations here at Benton. And there's a lot of them that do. I think the Jones family does, right? Stevenson's family does. Woodruff, y'all go back 4 generations. Who else? Yeah, the Lyles family goes back 4 generations. See, there you go. In what, 1842? Okay. 1842. So see how that goes? Well, you know, that's one of the things. Have somebody who's not a part of that, it's kind of hard to break in sometimes, right? And when I talk about breaking in, feel comfortable with everybody else. We as a church have an obligation to make those who are new feel welcome. And that's one of the things we're doing before we get together to worship, where we say, hey, everybody get up and go talk to a visitor, talk to somebody you don't know. But it's also important just in the community. As Christians, we need to be the most welcoming folks. And we really need to be working hard to get to know folks, take care of folks, and share with them the gospel. And that's what he's talking about here as far as entertaining these strangers, which are there. All right, now verses 4 and 5 and 6. Marriage is honorable among all, the bed undefiled. But fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with all such things as you have. For he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? Okay, 2 extremes in marriage, all right? Or 2 extremes concerning sexual relationships. First extreme is lasciviousness, okay? In other words, sleep with anyone, anywhere, anytime. There is no reason ever to have self-control, no reason to ever worry about it. You just sleep with anybody. And this was very prevalent in the first century, even more so than the sexual revolution that happened in this country in the 60s and 70s. In the first century, especially in the Greek areas, this is very prevalent. Most of the worship, today we look at the beautiful temples in Greece and we look at the beautiful statues in Greece and we think, wow, that's pretty awesome. It's a good thing we didn't live in that time because it was very saturated with lasciviousness. The whole worship of Athena, the whole worship of Diana had to do with sleeping with the temple priest. And the whole religion, in many ways, revolved around that. The city of Pompeii, which was destroyed by Mount Vesuvius on the Italian peninsula, or close to the Italian peninsula, that happened about 72 AD. They started digging up all that area and started restoring it A lot of people were amazed. There for a while, you had to be a certain age to go through the city, even though it was a European city, because of all the sexual graffiti put all over the walls in all of the brothels which were in existence there. That's the Greek world in which Paul and the other biblical writers are writing into. So lasciviousness is one thing that says, hey, sleep with anybody, anywhere, anytime. Now, is our culture leaning towards that? Why, sure. You watch just about any TV program, you go to see any movie. Many of the popular movies out nowadays really push those sort of things, correct? Okay? And so that is not the Christian way. The Christian way is the sex should occur in marriage. God made one man, one woman for life. Okay? Now, the other aspect of it, which really picked up in Christianity in the 3rd through 5th centuries, all the way through the 8th, and the monasticism and such, is called asceticism. In other words, you should never sleep with anyone because that is gross, dirty, and unspiritual. And that's called asceticism, which means don't engage in such things because it defiles a person. A religious person should not feel that attraction. A religious person should never have that urge. You need to control that urge and not even have it. Now, is that Christian? No. That's what the writer of Hebrews is saying here. Marriage is, what's that word there in verse 4? Marriage is honorable. And the bed is undefiled. Okay? The relationship between a man and a woman, the sexual relationship, is a holy relationship. God made men and we're all the same. Live with a woman for a while in marriage, you'll learn you're not the same aspect of life. He made in the marriage relationship. But people push it one way or the other. And you'll see in vast denominations today. Some of them go over to the and shouldn't engage in that. God has a balance. And that balance needs to be taught in the Lord's church. Neither lasciviousness or this. Yeah, if you never have, and you die out. And that used to be a major problem in the 4th to about the 12th centuries. If you were a Christian, if you were a good Christian, you went to a monastery, or you went to did they call them nunneries? Nunneries just sound so, okay. Anyway, yeah, a convent, that's what it would be. You'd go to a nunnery. Convent would be much better. You go to, all right. Now, you'll notice as you run through the Bible, especially in the book of Ephesians, and also here, and then they go into money. Usually those two happen together throughout. They both deal with the topic of self. And the person who can't control himself on one will not be able to control himself on the other. All right? People are bounding themselves but deeper and deeper and deeper debt. And there's a lot of people who are under the oppression in any way. Why is that? Of how money works. And a lack of respect for being able to wait, learning to wait for their helper. All right? So verses 1 through 6 talks about our social relationships. Okay? Now verse 7, we're going to talk a little bit more about the church relationship, 7 through 17. Okay? Now as far as not just God being with us and also marriage being honorable, is verses 7 and 17. There's a ton talking, these leaders. Are they preachers? Are they apostles? Or are they... We'll read it and then we'll come back to that, okay? Verse 7, remember those who rule over you, who have spoken a word of their conduct. Jesus cried out with the various and strange doctrines, for it is good for the heart to be established by grace, and not with foods which have not profited those who have been occupied with him. We have an altar from which those who serve the tabernacle have no right to eat. For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest for sin are burned outside the camp. Therefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered outside the gate. Therefore let us go forth to him outside the camp, bearing his reproach. For we have no continuing city, but we seek the one to come. Therefore by him let us continually offer the sacrifice of praise to God, that is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to his name. But do not forget to do good and to share, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased. Verse 17. Obey those who rule over you and be submissive, for they watch out for your souls as those who must give an account. Let them do so with joy and not with grief, for that would be unprofitable to you. Okay. Remember those who rule? If you lived back in the days of chart sermons, any of y'all remember chart sermons? Remember the old bed sheet charts and such? I always liked those way back when. Okay. One of the more famous ones, roadblocks on the way to hell, and it focuses on verse 7. What are your roadblocks? God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, the Word, and the family of God. You have to make it through each one of those in order to make it to hell. Okay. Carried about by strange doctrines. Okay. Now, the strange doctrines appear to be about foods, appear to be about the worship, tabernacle worship, and appear to be about the law of Moses. Okay? This book was written dealing with. There was a pull to bring them from the church to what? Back to the way in which they were. A habit is hard to break. How many days do you have to do something to break a habit? Do you know? Okay, 30 days. And y'all lived in Kentucky. Y'all used to smoke. Everybody in Kentucky used to smoke, right? All right, so if you used to smoke, how long did it take you to go from smoking a pack a day to not smoking? Was it just 30 days? 8 years. 8 years, huh? Get in the habit of having something in your hand, you just develop hard to break. It's just tough stuff. Think about that, breaking that habit, put it in a spiritual dynamic. That's what these Hebrews are going through. You have all your life learned that to get close to God, you have to follow circumcision, you have to eat the right foods, you have to keep the Sabbath, okay? And what you have to do is be a Christian, okay? That way, to see somebody eating bacon and not see it as a big deal. Okay? To instead of going to the synagogue, meet with the Lord's church on the first day of the week. There'd be a lot of syncretism, a lot of wanting to join the two. Get rid of that old way of life and now live godly. And the godly way to today, relativism, right? Well, there's not a right or wrong. Most people will say, what will they say? That is just your opinion. That is just what your church teaches. That's just what your church believes. I'll believe what my church believes. You believe what your church. Levels of truth and all sorts of levels of being right. We're all on a different road and going to the same place. A lot of people push that, okay? And boy, do we see it. I hear from more and more preachers about celebrating Lent. Church preachers of our fellowship, okay? And people are attracted to Lent, especially younger people. The idea of outward works, outward religion. I remember one guy, he was teaching at Abilene Christian. He had put out a series on Lent and how to celebrate Lent and everything else. And I sent a message to him and I said, if you just change, and that would fix everything. Well, later he eventually did change it to fasting. Why do we want to follow Lent so much? Okay, everybody else is, okay? When you please more people, get a bigger market share in many ways, okay? Why else do we want to have a worship that follows a lot of different folks? Was this ever a problem in the church or in God's people in Israel? What did they cry out to Samuel? Give us a king so that we can what? Be like the nations around us, okay? Aaron sitting there at the bottom of Mount Sinai. Moses disappears. The people cry out to Aaron, give us a god. Like we carried that bull all the way across because it looked just like the Egyptian god, okay? And throughout Israel's history, they always wrestled with wanting to have the same gods that everybody else had. Baal, Ashereth, Molech, whoever else it may be. Today, a lot of times we have syncretism. We want to bring in everybody else's religion so that we can all not have conflict, so that we can all be together. Okay? Works great politically. Our nation is the greatest nation on this earth, in my opinion, because of our syncretism, because we take the best of all the immigrants, take the best of what they bring in. But religiously speaking, it's not the best. Okay? He makes a point about Jesus and the sacrifices being carried outside of the camp. Remember, they would sacrifice, and then they would carry the bodies outside the camp to dispose of them. He makes the point Jesus was crucified outside the camp, right? He's making the same point to us today. These people had been, by so doing, he says, remember, you're just like Jesus. He was taken outside of Jerusalem to be crucified. You're just like the true sacrifices of God, which they had to haul out as well. It's a neat little play on words, and bearing his reproach. We seek the city that is to come, the fruit of the lips, our sacrifices, right? We don't sacrifice animals today. You get in trouble if you do, right? I may have brought this up before. 1993, a fella in, I think it was Pensacola, wanted to show his church. It was a denominational church. It was a pastor. And he wanted to show his church the difference between Old Testament worship and New Testament worship. And the guy, obviously he's unemployed now, but the guy brought a live sheep to church, okay? Took him in front of the church building, in front of the membership, because he sacrificed a sheep in front of everybody. He slit the throat, pulled out the entrails, put them in the dish, and began to, all right? The guy was arrested for cruelty to animals. Now, let me look back here and see why they went through. Totally different. We don't do that in the Lord's church. Today, what do you and I sacrifice? Yes, Jesus is our sacrifice for sins, but what is it that you and I give? Our lives. Our lives. And the way he puts it here, in verse 15, the fruit of our lips. As a man speaks, so is his heart, right? Okay? The fruit of your lips. That is your sacrifice today. The lives that you live. Romans chapter 12 and verse 1. Okay, verse 17 and verse 7. Obey those who rule over you. As you look in verse 7, you see that they taught you the word and they lead you in the word. Okay, verse 17, obey your rulers. Okay, and he says, remember, they have to give an answer for your soul. Referring to the apostles. Because we don't know if the apostles necessarily taught them. And it doesn't fit as far as having to answer for each one of their souls. Many people who are pastor-centered or preacher-centered say this is referring to the preacher. And the preacher is the one who lords over the church, the one who gets to run everything. Okay? Is this referring to the preacher? Is the preacher ever given authority over the church in Scripture? No. Right? That's why when people come up to me, I say, go talk to the elders. I just talk. I don't get to make any decision. I don't have any sort of say in the church. I just get to talk a bunch. Okay? The preacher does not have authority over the church. Now, he has authority in that he preaches the word, and he has to preach in season and out of season, convincing, rebuking, exhorting with all long suffering, right? 2 Timothy chapter 4. But the preacher is not given authority over the church. Now, when you and I run over to Acts chapter 20, we see where Paul meets with the Ephesian elders. The Spirit has set them up as elders, right? And there he says, your job is to oversee them because you will give an answer for their souls. Now, we go over to 1 Peter chapter 5. When you go to 1 Peter chapter, talking about he himself is an elder, he says, and I exhort you as other elders, an answer for the work you're doing over those souls that you have, because you're going to give that same answer to the one who rules over. And 17 are referring over the flock. Now, there are a lot of misunderstandings by a lot of people in the Lord's church today. Because of, I'll finish real quick. For the most part, the church, they only have the authority of influence. That doesn't fit verses 7 and 17 of the book of, or chapter 13 of Hebrews. It doesn't fit Acts 20. It doesn't fit 1 Peter chapter 5. Elders oversee the church. All right. Thank you for being here. Enjoyed being with us. We worship at 5. The last time we get to worship at 5, I think, until, for several months. Don't miss the opportunity. See you later.